So you just finished your first week or so of medicine. Maybe you found it easy, maybe you didn't. Regardless, it is quite different from high school, and I'm here to share my tips that I gathered from my first year of medicine last year with you guys. Hi everyone, welcome back to the channel. My name is Darren and I'm a second year med student studying at Monash University here in Melbourne, Australia. My first year of medicine was a little bit rocky. I found the adjustment quite challenging. I missed a lot of my high school friends. I missed high school and I also found uni academically quite difficult as well. Like medicine, the lectures were quite hefty, a little bit clunky at times, and I also wasn't as disciplined as I should have been. Maybe your first week of uni has been, amazing, which is really awesome to hear, but you've probably also seen like how difficult it can be as well. And I've seen a lot of people in forums talking about the adjustment to first year medicine being quite difficult. So I reflected quite deeply on my first year of Monash medicine, and I feel like this year has gotten off to a much better start. And all those things I've learned, or at least the main things, I will try to pass down to you guys in this video. Two things to note before I dive into the bulk of the video. Firstly, I am studying at Monash University. Other universities might have slightly different med programs. My advice, I've checked, should be applicable to everything, but if you guys have questions about how I might adjust my advice to your specific uni, just leave the question in the comments below. The second thing to note is that this video is giving 3 tips on how to deal with the academia of medicine. The reason I'm not talking about social life is because we don't have a social life. No. It's not because we don't have a social life. It's because I have another video in which I talk about all the social life. So that video was about sort of general advice for first year uni students, not specifically for first year med uni students. And in that video, all the same social stuff applies to this video, so I'll just be repeating myself. So please check out that video if you're curious about how to balance social life with academia. But anyway, let's jump into the first tip. My first tip is to really thoroughly understand the lecture content when you're listening to it. So for Monash Uni, all our lectures are pre-recorded, and that meant whenever something the lecturer had said didn't make sense to me or didn't fit in well with what else I had heard, I'd pause the video, go do more research, watch more videos on it, read some more articles on it until it all fit together well in my head. If your lectures aren't pre-recorded, then I highly recommend sitting down after the lecture and really just going through the content again, making sure it all fits together well in your brain, and also just grappling with anything that the lecturer said that didn't really make sense in the moment. Now, I didn't do this last year. I saw lectures more as something to get done, and because it kind of is, like you have 5 or 6 lectures each week, and it's really easy to see it as like a to-do list to tick off so that you're done with the work for now. But I highly recommend trying to understand the content, not being afraid to take a really long time to understand a really short lecture. Last year I saw it as a checklist and it didn't go that well, like I didn't understand the content that well, and I never came around to like memorizing it, because when you push things later you're less likely to do it. But this year, each time I watch a lecture, I pause it very often, go do more research very often. I'm not afraid to just spend time watching multiple YouTube videos on the same topic. And also sometimes they give the lecture slides right before the actual video, and I just spend ages mulling over the lecture slides trying to understand everything. An example of this is that we've been learning about the respiratory system and the lungs in particular in uni, and so we've been learning about the different measurements for the different volumes. For example, vital capacity is measured from like a as much of an inhalation as you can take, and as much of an exhalation as you can take. The difference between those two, so from like the top, massive inhalation, to the bottom, massive exhalation, is the vital capacity. So there are many other different names for the different volumes, and you can just memorize them, right? Like that's probably what I would have done in the past, would have just put it in an Anki card and just try to memorize it. But what I did instead was I really tried to understand the differences between them. For example, vital capacity versus forced vital capacity, functional residual volume versus residual volume, and I really looked at the graph as well. So as you saw before, I was sort of drawing it because I find visualizing things helps me learn, so I took the extra step to really see where each volume fits in, rather than simply taking the information at face value and trying to memorize it. And I found that that was extremely effective. Like in class, I found that I understood the information much better. Any questions the lecturer posed, I had sort of thought of before when I heard the concept, because I found it was weird. And also like I could explain it to my friends as well, which is always a good feeling. So I highly recommend you don't be afraid to spend a long time listening to your lectures, because that's part of the learning process. Don't see them as a to-do list just to tick off, but as like a really important learning block in your learning. One thing I'd like to mention is that a lot of people talk about the difference between understanding and memorizing, how you should understand and not memorize, but the difference between the two has rarely been explained well. For me personally, I really like visualizing things. When people say certain vocabulary words to me, I visualize things in my head. And so for me, understanding means I'm able to see how it works. And in general, I just feel like understanding means seeing how things relate to each other and how it works in a system. So for example, you might be learning about mitosis, right? PMAT, like prophase, metaphase, anaphase, telophase. I think it's much better if you see how one phase goes to the other, goes to the other, goes to the other. Like you sort of see it playing as a video in your head. It goes from this to this to this to this, rather than sort of just memorizing them at face value in like a random order in a flashcard deck. So this happens in metaphase, this happens in telophase. But if you can really see how one thing progresses to the other and how that each step is necessary to get from that end goal, to get from that beginning goal to the end goal, I feel like that's what memorization means to me. Understanding relationships and being able to visualize the content that's being taught. Now my second tip is pretty straightforward, and it is to stay on top of your lectures and your pre-work. I'll talk about them a little separately. So lectures are pretty unrelenting. You have 6, I think I had 6 in year 1, but for this year, for some reason, I've had 5 this week and next week. But they come each week and they really compound as well. So if you leave some behind for next week, it's like another hour or more added onto your next week's study, which is quite tiring, and you'll be behind everyone as well, which is really annoying. So I highly recommend you have a schedule for lectures. At the moment for me, I am aiming to do a lecture on Sunday and a lecture like every day after that. So I have 5 lectures, hopefully finish by Thursday. The past week I missed a day, so I ended up finishing on Friday, which is like still fine, still before the start of the next week. But especially in sort of week 5, week 6, that's when people start falling behind. So I really recommend you try and have a schedule and really stick to it in a very disciplined and rigorous way. Now the second thing is about pre-work. Now you probably know these 2 different feelings. One, in class, you know what people are talking about, you know what the teacher's talking about, you're engaging with classroom discussions and answering the teacher's questions. And the other feeling where you just haven't done anything and you just don't know what's happening. And the second feeling is really awful and just ruins your whole day in general. So I think pre-work's really important, of course from the knowledge standpoint, but also because you can just engage much better in class and your whole mood is just lifted as well. Pre-work is like sort of easy to do, but also easy to not do, to neglect. But I highly recommend scouting out what work needs to be done before the next class and getting that done so that you enjoy the class much more. My third tip is a how to study tip, and I'm happy to make a more in-depth video on like how I'm aiming to study this year and what I've learned from trying different methods through last year. But this study tip, I'm aiming at sort of the more fluffier subjects or the more unusual subjects that you didn't really have in high school. So in high school you had really concrete like history, maths, geography, English. In uni, at Monash Med, it's called the Health Enhancement Program, and there are other subjects as well. You guys probably have equivalents in other unis where it's essentially talking about mindfulness, connectivity, general well-being, and things like complementary and alternative medications as well. So these are really important in the workplace, of course, and to become a doctor, but they're hard to like assess because they're more so ideas and ideas for you to grapple with. Now the best way to prepare for exams with these is to look at PSPs. So at Monash Uni we have PSPs, which are sort of lectures held by students a year older than us to help us with the content. Other unis almost certainly have equivalents, I hope. And so these guys really know what they're talking about because they've been through the exam, been through the content. They know like what are the key takeaways the examiner or the lecturer wants you to take away from the lectures. Usually the lectures are a lot of content, a lot of stats, all that. I wouldn't really recommend trying to memorize every single stat. Well, I wouldn't recommend trying to memorize every single stat because it's not very helpful, and that's not really what the main idea with these subjects is. There are certain stats you have to memorize because they're sort of repeated through the years, and the PSPs, of course, and the older year levels will help you with that. So make sure you really engage with those sessions, especially in those more sort of unusual subjects. And another thing that's really useful is, once again, revision lectures held by older students right before exams. Those are like really good for picking up on what are the key takeaways from those more sort of well-being type subjects. Also, just finally, with preparing for those kinds of subjects, we've talked about sort of lectures held by older students, but also something that's really useful is exam papers. I don't know if this is the case for other unis, but at Monash Uni there's a very rigorous process for sort of accepting exam questions to be used, and so the questions repeat themselves a lot. So if you do pass exams and you pick up on the key questions about these subjects that the lecturers are asking, then these are the questions that you should probably pop into a flashcard or just make sure you can figure out on the day, because they may actually come up in your actual exam. So that's it with my 3 tips. Overall, it is just a bit of a slog. You can have all the best tips in the world, but if you don't put in the time, you're not going to get the results. And like, I feel that you don't really have to have the perfect study methods, but if you put in the time, that gives you like a buffer to find what works for you, etc., etc. But time and discipline and hard work is most important. Also, the hard work is really worthwhile and rewarding as well. You get really long holidays, especially in the first 2 years of Monash medicine, at least. And I find you enjoy the holidays so much more, and you enjoy your time with friends so much more, knowing you've like put in the hard yards at home. And what I think is particularly awesome about medicine is that each thing you're learning is going to be useful to you in the future in some capacity. And so like, you feel like you're one step closer to becoming a doctor. You feel like you're really learning things that are so applicable to you in the future. And I find that process of just getting better every day, learning a bit more about the human body, which I see like all around me every day, as an incredibly pleasing journey to be on. Thank you guys for tuning in to today's video. I hope you've enjoyed it. I actually really liked making this video. It was really nice being able to reflect on my first year of medicine. I've had a really hectic week. Like, I've had a lot of swimming, a lot of classes in person now, and I live really far from Monash. And also like early morning classes, like 8:30 AM as well. So I had to wake up like pretty early for that. But it's been really enjoyable. I hope you guys have had similar experiences as well. If not, any qualms you've had, please leave them in the comments below. I'd be happy to chat with you guys about that. Good luck with your studies, high school, uni, any studies that you're pursuing, and I look forward to seeing you all next time.